Tonight I'm going to read you a poem of sorts, keeping in mind that the way I define poetry anymore is condensed thought expressed artistically. I hope what I read tonight will somewhat fill that definition. Let me explain a little bit before I read it to you. I'm not planning on doing much more tonight other than just read this poem. My father's family had 12 children in it. And this combination, I forget exactly the mix of girls and boys, but there are a few more boys than girls, but not too many more, and something like 5 girls and 7 boys, I think. And they were my aunts and uncles, of course, growing up. Most of them lived nearby, some a little bit further off. But for the most part, I had interaction with them. And it was positive interaction. I respected them. They had all different kinds of lifestyles. Some of them were a little bit closer maybe to my father, or at least came to visit him more often. Maybe closer isn't the right word, because some of the ones he lived closest to were our neighbors, and they didn't come that often, but we'd always bump into them and do things with them. And as a boy growing up, I worked for some of them and spent time with their kids, my cousins, and was always intrigued when my dad, sometimes it was through my mother's efforts or urgings, would tell us a little bit about his home life, his family. I think he was always just a little bit disappointed that he didn't achieve as much as he would like to have early in his life. And a lot of that had to do with their financial circumstances, I'm sure, and a lot of it just had to do with the times that they lived in. Both he and my mother graduated as 8th graders and never went to other formal schooling. But they were both, I would call them both well educated. And I could go on and on about examples to prove that, but they understood things that we kids needed to know. And when my father would talk about his siblings and the family that he grew up in, up through 8th grade isn't very long to live with your parents. And yet in his family, that's kind of the way they did things. When you were done with 8th grade education, well, you were expected to start at least laying the groundwork for finding your own way through life and not having your parents provide for you as much. And I don't know the details about all that, other than I know that the boys in that family, at least some of them that my dad stayed with, stayed over on the farm in Lanark that they ran, and worked on the farm. And it was an old farmhouse that they lived in and stayed there and worked, while my grandparents lived in Paris in another house. Long story short, as far as that part of it goes, is that not all of my uncles, in this case, were all that upstanding as far as the way we would think of it these days. Some of them had some bad habits Some of them didn't. Some of them, I'm sure, seemed a little rough around the edges, as I think my father did as well. I think my mother sensed this early on in their courtship, and yet she worked through it and was able to help him rise to the surface, I guess is the way I'd say it. And he helped her do the same thing, only in a different way, as far as her being a mother and providing for her. He did magnificent things. Awesome. Almost unbelievable in some respects. And I think the same that could be said about her as far as her interactions with him. She was able to accomplish some things that were awesome and unbelievable, beyond what maybe he even expected. Well, I'm not going to get too far into that. Tonight, this poem that I'm going to read actually is about his very youngest sister, who was the last one of the 12 children. And though I won't talk too much about the others, and I could and maybe should, I'll spend some time talking about her, because this poem that I wrote was one that I promised her I'd write, because I just felt the urge to do something to help her celebrate her 100th birthday this past year. And I started the poem over a year ago now, I think, and it's just rudimentary beginnings, just some thoughts that come to my mind that I jotted down. And eventually, I don't know, the way I write poetry is not by the book. I just pick it up now and then, and if I'm in the right frame of mind, I add some words. And finally, before her birthday, and I was able with my brother to go up to her 100th birthday party, and it was a joyous event, one that we were able to just kind of sit back and watch and see how she and her 4 children, she lost her husband decades before that, and raised the children to a large degree on her own, at least the younger ones, and she was referred to by my mother as the Angel of Soda Springs. That's where she lived. And if you were around her very much, her name was Helen Ray. And if you were around Helen Ray very much, you soon came to know why my mother would refer to her as the Angel of Soda Springs. Her every day was filled with something that was designed to help somebody else. And even when her children had moved away and she was living there by herself, I had a daughter that lived with her for a while she was doing some nursing work. And it was just a blessing in our life to hear about some of the stories and some of the things that she was doing and had done. And anyway, this angelic work that she was doing was just from the goodness of her heart. It wasn't anything that anybody had assigned her to do. She just saw needs and took care of them, volunteered wherever she could, and helped people. Really extended herself to members of what was now a very extensive family. You can imagine she was the last one, and there were 11 siblings older and all the cousins and everything. She seemed to reach out and keep contact with and express love for all of those people. She always had good things to say, especially about my mother. And also about my dad, her brother. So she was the very last one. All of the other siblings, her siblings, passed away. And some time ago, I read a little poem. I'd have to Google it to tell you who wrote it, but it was called The Last Leaf. And it was about the last leaf of autumn hanging on the tree outside somebody's window and how they were impressed by it. And they wrote about it. And so when I was thinking about writing this poem for my Aunt Helen Ray on her 100th birthday, that title came to mind. And when I told her I was going to write the poem, I even told her what the title of it was going to be. I said, I'm going to call this poem The Last Leaf. And then I left her wondering after that, and I didn't really get back to her. Like I said, it was over a lot of months, several months, that I actually put down the words. But there was a lot of thought that went into her life, how I might pay a tribute to her. That was my intent in writing this poem, is to help people see, even her own family members, her children and grandchildren, see from our perspective what a wonderful woman she was and how she held up the family traditions right to the very end. And by the way, she is still alive. So here's the poem. I'm going to read it to you just as though you were pulling it out of the envelope and reading it yourself, or having her read it to you. I presented it to her at her 100th birthday party when I didn't really get a chance to talk to her all that much. I just gave it to one of her sons and said, pass that along to her when she gets through with the excitement of grandchildren and great-grandchildren and all of the hustle and bustle that little kids can create at a party like that. You can only imagine. And he said he would. And I received words after it. And that's another thing about her. It's almost impossible to do anything for her without her bending over backwards to thank you. And she thanked me for this poem multiple times. Sometimes it would be directly, and sometimes through, I'd hear it back from somebody else that she'd shared it with in the day center or the care center where she now lives. So here it is. I'll look down a bit because I'm just going to read it, but I'll try to read it as best I can, putting the emphasis where I remember having thought about it. The Last Leaf. The Last Leaf, a tribute to a gracious, beautiful caboose. My Aunt Helen Ray is the last living of 12 children born to Arthur Phipp and Nina Louise Passy Eborn as she approaches her 100th birthday. The Last Leaf. A sapling's branch, in course of time, prompts bud to swell and burst, and yields a lime-like hue to brighten winter's barren grip upon the earth. Those vibrant, fleeting days ere long give way to summer green, to shelter fruit from sun and wind, a home where birds can nest and sing. And from the blossom forms the fruit, the product of its soul, to sweeten and perpetuate the sought-for heavenly goal. Designed by deity itself, the tree, the leaf, the flavor, to offer for the reaching hand not blandness, but true savor. When summer forfeits lengthy days, when birds are southward bound, when leaves with awestruck splendor fade, then flutter to the ground, when fruit is dropped and chill winds blow, but droughts still kept away. The memories of weeks gone by inspire tomorrow's day. But wait, look, there yonder. What's that left there on the vine? A single leaf. One last leaf. And oh my, does she shine. You see right there, this last leaf's got a golden hue. It's no wonder she hangs on. She's still giving, guiding others to the awaiting dawn. And she can show the way. You bet she can. She'll give you hope and make you laugh. And in her gentle way, when you're in need, she'll make your day. This last leaf's got vinegar. I've heard it said, and I agree. She's not afraid to speak her mind, won't bend for mere conformity, and doesn't flutter for just any wind that blows. She radiates conviction, and it shows. This last leaf for here and now and works, this last leaf lives for here and now and works to make it count. She doesn't know the meaning of dismount. She's certainly not riveted upon the setting sun, but boldly looks to each new day, repeating, I'm not done. And when you see that glimmer and that twinkle with the smile, and sense repeated effort and absorb some of her style, you walk away committed to doing something more. This last leaf will inspire you to the core. Ancestry acknowledged, she knows from whence she came, while always helping others do the same. Because roots and leaves are teammates and need each other's care. Void would reign supreme unless they pair. A parentage in heaven's realm, she understands as well. Identity and purpose guide her way. She knows this truth innately. So love that she's received, she spreads around quite freely every day. But this last leaf on the family tree won't be the last at all. Her well-born fruit has seeds intact. They return the call to stretch and duplicate and do as they've been shown, to cycle all the goodness from memories full-blown and plant again another root with new life from its own. The sun, the light, the chlorophyll, the wonder of it all emerges from a single leaf, now waiting homeward call. But when that last leaf flutters and falls to greet those gone, we'll all thank God, but verify the fact that she lives on. And then I wrote these words to her. Dear Helen Ray, may your next 100 years be as inspiring as these past 100 years have been. Wherever it is, have a joyous, well-deserved birthday. We love you oh so much. I hope I've given you a little bit of flavor about the meaning of a life well lived. Helen Ray's life was well lived, and I just felt like she needed to have a little tribute, at least, and do my part to see that she had this little tribute from me, and I hope it filled the bill somewhere for somebody down the road. Maybe her posterity hasn't seen it yet by now. Maybe they have. I don't know. I do know that it pleased her when she read it. And when I heard that it had pleased her, then of course it pleased me. I hope my life whenever it's over. I've only lived 3/4 of the time that she's been alive. But when my life is over, I hope people can reflect on some things that I've done. Some guidance, some service, some love, some gratitude. Not necessarily toward me, but gratitude I feel to all those around me. And that when my time is done on this earth, and it might be before hers is done, you never know, that there might be some goodness come out of it that lives on long after I'm dead, just like her goodness will live on long after she's dead. And if you're around her very long, you don't have to spend very much time with her to know that that's going to happen, because she had a lot of influence. It was all good influence. She acted upon benevolent thoughts, and those actions that she heeded because of those thoughts paid not only others big dividends, but I think eventually came full circle back to her. And I hope they continue to grow until she finishes her time on this earth. And then it's not over. She walks through a curtain and just keeps going. And that thought is a wonderful thought. And it's not a thought that's in vain. It's reality. It's doctrine. It's fundamental to my beliefs. And I pray it will be fundamental to your beliefs. Our lives are purposeful and meaningful and absolutely marvelous. Even those that seem to veer off and take a different direction at certain times of our life, come back and they seem to get on a path that provides a lot of goodness and brings them back into the arms of their Savior, their Redeemer, who is responsible for their well-being too. And as they live, they come to know that, just like I've come to know it. Helen Ray is a shining example, that last golden leaf on the tree. How proud her parents should be of her, as well as all of her siblings and all of us that know her. She is a loving person. I like to think of myself as a loving person, and I love you. Good night.